Psalm 121 is the second of those 15 psalms called Shir HaMa'alot, the songs of ascents. It's in the plural, the ascents, almost to convey a long journey, though we don't know if these psalms were necessarily written for pilgrimage or necessarily, as I shared yesterday, written for the 15 steps that the priest would go up to the choir of the Levites at the temple. At the same time, these psalms were collected at a certain point as 15 poems of pilgrimage. I'm going this morning to first read the 8 verses, and then I will begin over and ask the question which you may be wanting to have in your mind as you hear the psalm: what's the context for its writing? Again, we don't know historically who wrote it, why, or when, and I'll share, frankly, a variety of possibilities. After my sharing some of the possibilities of who, when, and where it was written, I'll go back and show some of the artistic weave. I will show you my cards up front. Of the 8 verses, all of them are couplets. And the verses like 1 and 2, 3 and 4 have a repeating word to intertwine those couplets. And so be aware as you listen for that construction that also has that sense of ma'alot, of steps, by the interlocking nature of the composition. And then I'll pull out at the same time some key phrases, some key images, and share different ways that those images are understood differently in different places and times. And then at the end, try to pull it together to answer the question, how does this psalm resonate for me? With that, the psalm, Psalm 121, which I've chosen to title Guardian of Israel. I will note as well that the phrase or the root guard or guardian of Israel occurs 6 times in the psalm. In that sense, it's the key word. And it will appear 3 times in the last 2 sentences. That's the interlocking word for verses 7 and 8. And even before, because my friend Cantor Shula is with us, I hear myself moving toward the melody of the opening line, which is what I knew of this psalm. The melody best known was composed by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, and I think I included it
Yes, you did.
in the mailing for today. But I can't help but center myself first to sing the first line in Hebrew, then I'll read in English. Esa einai el harim me'ayin yavo ezri. All right, it repeats. And now in English. A song for ascents. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where will come my help? My help is from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot stumble. God will not slumber, your guardian. Behold, God does not slumber and does not sleep, guardian of Israel. Adonai is your guardian. Adonai is your shade at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul. Adonai will guard your going out and your coming in from now until evermore. In the opening of my singing of that line, I mentioned that Kenner Shula and I talked about the melody, and she said she often opens funerals with it because there is this sense of it being a psalm of comfort. The key theme of this psalm is trust in God. God, the Creator, will protect you. And likewise, verses 4 and 8. Behold, God does not slumber and does not sleep, guardian of Israel. Adonai will guard your going out and your coming in from now until forevermore, are traditionally recited every night before going to sleep. And there's the sense for the rabbis that to fall asleep means to feel safe, to let go of fears. And verses 4 and 8 are part of the prayer before the Shema on one's bed to fall asleep. And so from the beginning of this psalm, let me point out those couplings. 1 and 2 have the same word, Ezri. It's the last and Hebrew word of 1 and the first word of 2, my help. Lines 3 and 4 is slumber. God does not, which is doze. God, so there's a difference between slumber and sleep. For some commentators, like the Malbim, to slumber is to take a quick half sleep versus sleeping, which is deeper. 6 and 7, the key link is shade. So, 5 and 6 is shade. And rather than being the same word, it's the same kind of image that God protects you from the sun and the moon. 7 and 8, the key word is guard. In regard to construction, there's also another technique throughout this psalm. The fancy term is Miraism, which means kind of opposites. So as to say all-inclusive, all in between. You have heaven and earth, sun and moon, day and night, going and coming, now and evermore. So another dimension of the composition are these, A to Z qualities being presented, perhaps to convey this all-encompassing feel of God's presence and safety. So with that, we'll start from the beginning. Esa einai el harim. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. And so now again, the question, what's the context for the composition? From where will come my help? And by the way, note that the question from where, may ayin, is usually identified with a place. From which place will come my help? 2 provides an answer, but it's a shift. It's not the answer, if you will, to the question. Because the question is, from where will my help come? And then the answer of 2 is, my help is from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Clearly, verse 1 implies that the psalmist is feeling threatened. But we don't know also if it's an immediate real threat or if that's just a metaphor, like falling asleep at night. Where will my safety come from? Or is this literally an endangered moment? And here, let me share some differences of opinion. Now, some of the classic commentators, Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, 12th century Spain, he says this is as if written by a sentry, a soldier on a lookout, with enemies potentially willing and ready to attack. Ibn Ezra, Spain, little after Radak, will say, it is the custom of anyone in straits and difficulties to lift up his eyes to see if help will come to repel the enemy. And so the classic Spanish medieval commentators see the initial context as military threat. And in a contemporary mode, Adin Steinsaltz, that great translator of the Talmud of Jerusalem of recent years, the Rashi of the 20th century, in this commentary to Psalms, will say, a person under siege or member of an army with an imminent attack, looking for signs of help. And the psalmist, now verse 2, answers his own question. Perhaps no soldier is coming to my aid, but God will. And so there, both classically, Adin Steinsaltz, an Orthodox rabbi, will see this as prompted not by pilgrimage, but by a soldier seeking support, and only later will be used for pilgrimage. At the same time, this very thick book by Martin Rosenberg and Bernard Zlotowitz, who I believe are professors at Hebrew Union College, say, relating to the context, the author, unlike the previous psalm, Psalm 120, does not seem to be experiencing immediate stress or danger. And thoughts that this is a pilgrimage psalm are pure speculation with no support. Robert Alter, on the other hand, in his recent translation and commentary, says, when you read the last line, Adonai will guard your going out, your coming in from now until evermore, sounds like pilgrimage. And I read this psalm, frankly, pilgrimage-like. He doesn't take a position. He says it can either have been written or is read as pilgrimage psalm, or more generally, God is there as a protective presence. Interestingly, in his introduction, he doesn't link it to a military threat per se. Last, in terms of context and how it's read, is medieval Jewish commentators read this as messianic. So Rashi, that important commentator of France of the 11th century, says these are the words in anticipation of the world to come, that this is looking forevermore into the far distance. Likewise, Midrash Socher Tov, which was before the 11th century, sees this as a messianic ascent. I'll pull that piece together. We don't know who read it, and obviously it doesn't matter for how it resonates for us personally, and yet it's to be understood that this psalm, for whatever reason and context it became a psalm identified with pilgrimage. Yesterday, with Rabbi Ariel Schoklapper, he showed how a wordplay can allow for multiple levels of meaning. So still with verse 1. Esa einai el haharim, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. In Hebrew, there are no vowels. Even in modern Hebrew, a newspaper in Israel doesn't have vowels, except poetry does in Israel today, because poetry, the vowels matter. Midrash Rabbah, those early imaginings of the rabbis, the original bibliodramatists, in Breshit Rabbah 68:2, see this, imagine this as the words of Jacob, leaving out of fear of his brothers, vowing to get back at him for having stolen the birthright. And he says as follows, here's the punctuation difference in Bereshit Rabbah. Esa einai el hehorim. I lift up my eyes to my parents. I lift up my eyes to my parents because he has his parents on his heart as he's now ran away with their encouragement from home. From where will my help come? So this is interestingly taken and put into the mouth of Jacob. One other kind of a mystical play in terms of word play. and that is me'ayin can either mean from where, but ayin also means nothingness. So again, layers of reading, right? There's the pshat, who wrote it, what was the context, what do the words mean? There's now, if you will, the homiletical part of taking a verse and putting it in a mouth of a particular speaker. And then there's, another layer, a layer of kind of an inner truth. And if you will, the sod, the mystical. So me'ayin can mean from nothingness will come my help, which is understood to be when I eliminate my ego, when I'm not worried, fill in the name of the author, and trust in God, that's where I will find my help. That's where I will find Adonai. I will find Adonai when I am ayin, in a state of egolessness, of nothingness. So that again may not have been the intention of the poet, but it is how a reader can extract layers of possibility. All right, back to the flow. My help is from Adonai. So although the question is from where, the answer now focuses on God. And in that regard, here's the possibility about these mountains. These mountains can either be looking up for help. Reinforcements are going to come in over the mountains, the soldiers that will help me. Or the mountains can be pointing upward, being seen as a symbol pointing toward the heavens. So I lift up my eyes upward, and that's how the psalm begins. I'm raising my eyes up. I'm looking up to the heavens. I'm looking up to God. And in that sense, there's an element of God being above. Hence, me'ayin, from where? My help is from Adonai. And then immediately this phrase, Oseh Shemayim Va'aretz, acknowledging God as the creator, maker of heaven and earth. And this phrase, Oseh Shemayim Va'aretz, is a phrase that will reoccur in Psalms and 4 other places as a description of God. It's a way also of acknowledging right up front the power of God. Though here there's going to be a shift. Here, my help is from God, and it's I lift up. So verses 1 and 2 is a speaker. I'm lifting up my eyes. And now verses 3 to 8 are a response. We don't know who's speaking in response. So he's asked this question, right? From where will my help come? And then he answers, my help is from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. And then God will not let your foot stumble. So it shifts from the I to the you. And the question, who is speaking? Is it him speaking to himself, reassuring himself? And now I pause. This is a psalm of confidence, of trust in God. And yet there is this thread of insecurity by virtue of the yous. It's as if he's either needing to reassure himself because he's not so sure, or if it's a pilgrimage psalm, it might be the leader of the group. It could be a priest. Or here's something, and last to think about, it may be because it is diaphonic. There are these back and forths. Behold, God does not slumber, does not sleep, guardian of Israel. Adonai is your guardian. Adonai is your shade at your right hand. 4 and 5 are on some level playing off each other. It could therefore be kind of choir, where one chants verse 4, and then the other reframes it, but it's really the same message in verse 5. Same thing, verses 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8 may be a call and a refrain. We don't know. Back to the image, where there's a move here from 2 to 3. It's a vertical move. Our eyes have gone up. God is the maker of heaven. And then we come back down to earth with the last word of 2 and what is being described of your foot will not stumble. So now we're looking at the earth. So there's that, you can almost see that movement of the eye from upward, downward, from 2 to 3. And we're told that God does not sleep nor slumber. Already a later commentary, Malbim, would say, well, why would that even be a question? We've seen this theme before. You find it with Elijah taunting the prophets of Baal. Our God does not sleep nor slumber. And the image here that the Malbim of Russia, 18th century, says, God, you don't see. So there's another interesting play here. Where will my help come from? Ultimately, you don't get to see God. But know that God is always present. Even though you can't see God, God is not sleeping. God is always mindful and wakeful. He is, she is, God is. And that's the key word that first appears here in verse 3 and is the key theme. Shom Recha, your guardian. Verse 4, the guardian of Israel. Verse 5, your guardian. And again, you can read it either as a statement of confidence or the need for reassurance. Adonai is your shade at your right hand. By day, the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Here, there's again a move from an enemy. That's the opening. The enemy, therefore, help is needed, to now it's nature itself that is threatening. So there's a shift in the nature of the danger. And in context, this is a desert world in which heat stroke is real. And so God will provide shade, or if you're a pilgrim, it's going to be hot on that march. God will be there. And others point out, in terms of God will be at your right hand, for soldiers, your shield was held in your left hand, and your right was therefore the more exposed side. That's one possible use of that metaphor. The other is the right is where the sword is held. It's your power. God will be there to help fight. By the sun, verse 6, will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Question, what is the danger of the moon at night? 2 possibilities. The classic commentators will say that at night it's moist and cold. So that too can be a danger, getting chilled. Heat stroke during the day, wet and chilled at night. God will protect you. But in Latin, luna leads to lunacy, moonstruck. There's also the folk fear of at night one can lose one's mind, lose one's way. God will guard you. And now the last 2 verses in terms of the play of content. Note that verse 7 is also said at Pidyon Haben. So the redemption of a son, a firstborn male on the 31st day, part of the tradition, you include in the ceremony, Adonai will guard you from all harm, God will guard your soul. Strong statement, pulling together what came before. And again, the choice of soul can be understood as your life or something more profound, your very inner being that connects you to God. And the closing line, Adonai will guard your going out and your coming in from now until evermore. It circles back to Creator. It circles back to God and eternity. Verse 2 and verse 8. that sense of evermore. This line, by the way, verse 8, is traditionally read or recited by heart in kissing the mezuzah. So at the entry to one's home, entry to one's door, and it's also called, Shaddai on a mezuzah. The word Shaddai means God, and on a mezuzah, it will often be seen as an acronym, Shomer Daltot Yisrael. God is the guardian of the doors of Israel. And it's traditional to touch the mezuzah as a mindful practice of liminal space, the going in and the coming out, and to recite verse 8. Adonai will guard your going out, your coming in from now and evermore. That phrase of coming in and going out is an echo of Deuteronomy 31:2, but there is used simply to describe daily activity. And so to pull this together, this psalm begins vertically and ends horizontally with going out and coming in. There's a lot of movement in this psalm in so many ways, and by the doublets with the repeating words, also a sense of moving along almost stepwise, transitioning couplet by couplet. There is movement and there is safety. God is the protector, and yet a need for constant assurance, to be told, Adonai will guard your going out and your coming in from now until evermore. This psalm, of course, was read by Jews often through 2,000 years in exile. They consistently read this as both a promise of the future, that there would yet be a time in which God would allow a return to a place of pilgrimage, to Jerusalem, and in that sense, read it as messianic. We're privileged on this, the day of Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, to know that we don't depend on God for protection. We protect ourselves. We honor the soldiers who've died for Israel. And yet we also know that although God does not foreclose the possibility of danger and damage, our own inner sense of connection to the goodness of creation, our own sense of security from within that comes from feeling in relationship with the transcendent that is immanent, as my teacher Peter Pitzley would say, with presence and mystery, that enables wherever we are and wherever we are going a sense of both being vertically and horizontally attuned and safe. With that, my friend, Peter Pitzley, as we honor you on Psalm 121, share with us some of your thoughts and reactions to this 8 verses. So you have to unmute.
Can you minimize or take that? Thank you, Ellie. Well, I just want to sort of draw a breath. It's almost as if you, my dear, and I always call you Ellie, but of course you're Rabbi Ellie, and please, if I call you Ellie, forgive me. In this context, you should always be acknowledged as Rabbi Ellie. And you have been my rabbi. No one knows better than you do the very eccentric path that I have led to this moment and continue to lead. And you have been my friend and my counselor, my study partner, consistently through 35, 36 years. And no one has taught me more than you what happens when you have a study partner. that the going out and coming in, the back and forth, the way in which two become more than two when there is conversation and inquiry. No one has shown me more than you that this way of studying a text, whether it's a poem or something from scripture, this way is the way that you go up, that you experience increasing illumination from the narrowness of your own perspective to engage and open to the perspective of the other. And this is a profoundly relational understanding of study. And it is very different from what has become the academic way of study, where the scholarly and authoritative voice silences all critics and appears on its own eminence as the last word in the matter. This ongoing dialectical process that is deeply based on a sense of identity as a relational identity and not as a solo or restricted identity. This is my idea. This is the most liberating possible way to engage both with text and with community. And so as much as you have honored me and been loyal, so to speak, to our friendship, I say it publicly here, and anyone who wants to hear it, I'll tell them, you have been an invaluable asset to me. And though both of my parents were Jewish, as you know, Ellie, I was raised in a very assimilated environment and found a very eccentric way through Midrash of accessing my own imagination in relationship to a scriptural tradition. It's interesting that this psalm in particular, and the reason that I think I brought it forward, and well, actually, before I say this, I want to remark upon, as an outsider, so to speak, to this process, as a witness to this, this teaching that you did. I want to say how impressed, moved, excited, and informed I was by how you approach this. And the balance between the shot and drash, between the text and the personal, you inhabit it beautifully, and you end by anchoring the text in the present, which is your present, your heart, where you are, and it's finally only there in that place that wisdom traditions, scriptural traditions come alive. The rabbis say, and everybody knows this in your community, I'm sure, that the Torah is written in white fire and black fire. Well, you are a beautiful exemplar of weaving, if they may be woven, the black and the white fire. So thank you. Thank you profoundly. You could say that my struggle or interest in this psalm has to do with its punctuation. To the best of my knowledge, biblical Hebrew is unpunctuated. Not if that's true, Ellie.
Yeah.
Okay. When I say to the best of my knowledge, it's truly a confession of a certain amount of limitation. So I have always read the psalm and heard it in my mind and heart as a statement rather than a question. I look to the hills whence cometh my strength. And I live now in the hill country north of New York City. And in this time in my life, I have left the city. I've left the city behind me. In fact, I dread going to the city, though I was born in the city. And I have come truly to understand viscerally the help that comes to me from the hills. Now, what I love about the psalm is really its statement in the second verse that the second verse doesn't so much contradict or even add to the first, but affirms it by saying that the God of the hills is the God who is beyond and the creator of the hills. It doesn't say you can't find strength in the hills. It says that the mystery of God is present in the hills. This is for me the fundamental necessity spiritually, which is to seek for immanence and to recognize the mystery of transcendence, the God that cannot be known. But at the same time to say that there is an environment in which we are placed where we can experience something of the divine, not separable from the place of here and now, but lurking and immanent in it. So I think most people will read scripture according to some very murky private theology because it's unavoidable to read a text about God without somehow bringing one's own inchoate sense of God into it and seeking to what extent does the text affirm or contradict or complicate my innate sense of theology. And the word shomer first occurs in the Garden of Eden story, if I'm right, that Adam and Eve are sent to till and to guard. It's often translated as till and tend, but I believe the shomer root
Right.
is there.
Right.
So in the beginning, there was some sense of a relationship to the natural world that wasn't just the garden where we just sat back and it was all done for us. Even in Eden, we had some kind of relationship to the natural world. If we tended it, it guarded us. In this moment in my life where I look at what is happening in our environment, it's very natural for me to feel a deep desire on my part to tend to the earth and to be affirmed that if I tend the earth, the God that has created the earth will also join in my tending. My prayer is that we need help. This is a psalm above all that admits the need for help, vulnerability, profound. So often I feel that our culture refuses to be vulnerable, refuses to admit either ignorance or uncertainty or anxiety or simply the need to help. I will be 80 my next birthday. And I can tell you that I am learning before I have to learn it. I am learning to ask for help. And it provides the asking for help often has opened for me an experience of the graciousness and kindness of others and the graciousness and kindness of circumstance where an other is there to help. So what touches me about this poem is, first of all, that the hills are alive with the sound of music around me. And second of all, that asking for help very often means that I can experience it.
Thank you. Any closing comment, Peter?
No, just thank you for this extraordinary honor of being part of this community. I've always been a bit of an outsider, and Groucho Marx once said, any community that wants me as its member is a community I wouldn't want to be part of. And I have come to feel exactly the opposite. Any community that invites me into the room is definitely a community that I want to be part of. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Having you in the room again always adds light of warmth and of wisdom. A treat to be able to honor you today.